Each B-17 had up to 13 machine guns. They flew in massive formations and could take incredible punishment, but the Luftwaffe still brought them down by the hundreds. One of the reasons was the blind spots of defensive guns. The idea of overlapping fire zones in formation was flawed in practice. Each gunner's field of fire was limited by aircraft structure, and coordination was rare, leaving exploitable seams. The powered turrets and flexible guns had physical rotation limits, meaning even if a gunner could see the fighter, they might not be able to aim at it due to mechanical stops. The top turret, located behind the cockpit, could not engage enemies approaching from high rear angles, which are the prime attack paths used by experienced German pilots. German training manuals actually mapped out B-17 blind spots, advising new pilots where to attack and how to approach without being exposed to return fire. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots knew exactly where the blind zones were and could hover in them briefly to line up precise shots before escaping. The combat box formation of B-17 was a tactical innovation but also a compromise. The staggered three-dimensional combat box formation was introduced to maximize defensive firepower and bombing spread, but it made formations more rigid and predictable for enemy fighters and flak gunners. While individual B-17s in a group overlapped their fields of fire, gaps still existed between adjacent groups in a larger raid, especially when making turns or after weather disruptions. German fighters often targeted the edges of formations and cut the corners where there was less crossfire. These edge planes were statistically more likely to be shot down. At high altitude, turbulence from neighboring aircraft made it hard to maintain exact spacing. This reduced the effectiveness of mutually overlapping gun coverage in real combat conditions. Unlike B-29, the B-17 lacked any centralized or computerized fire control. Each gunner relied solely on their own eyes, judgment, and timing, even during complex attacks. In combat, it was common for multiple gunners to lock onto the same visible enemy aircraft, especially if it approached from the front or side, while other threats remained unengaged. German fighters often attacked from several angles at once. With no command structure or prioritization, gunners became overwhelmed and disorganized, reducing effectiveness dramatically. Gunner training usually focused heavily on individual marksmanship and equipment handling, but rarely included simulated teamwork or coordination across gun stations during an attack. B-17 defensive positions used basic optical ring and bead or reflector sights, requiring gunners to manually estimate lead and distance, even against fast-closing enemy fighters. Enemy fighters often closed at over 400 miles per hour during head-on or diving attacks. This means gunners had only 1 to 2 seconds to spot, track, lead, and fire, which is far too short for most manual aiming methods. Unlike late-war bomber models with gyroscopically stabilized gun sights, most B-17 gun positions shook with the aircraft's vibration and turbulence, making accurate tracking during turns or dives even harder. At 25,000 feet, it could reach -10 degrees Celsius or lower. Gunners wore thick gloves, which reduced dexterity while aiming, and frost buildup often obstructed gun sights or optics. Flak usually preceded fighter attacks, by design. Luftwaffe defenses were layered. First, they used flak to damage and scatter bomber formations. Then fighters came to exploit the confusion. Disrupted formations were much easier for fighters to penetrate. German flak strategies sometimes focused on destroying the lead bomber or pathfinder in a formation, knowing that damaging this plane would disorient the rest of the group. Even when flak was thick, B-17 pilots were ordered not to maneuver. Breaking formation made the bomber far more vulnerable to fighters, so they were forced to fly straight in tight formation through the barrage. Flak patterns were well planned along preset bombing routes. Anti-aircraft batteries set up flak belts to concentrate fire in areas where formations had to fly tight, straight, and level, especially during the final bomb run. German fighter attacks were regularly pre-briefed and scripted. Luftwaffe squadrons practiced pre-assigned approach angles in training. Each Staffel or flight group would know its entry vector and disengagement path before takeoff, making their attacks highly choreographed. German fighters didn't attack all at once, but in timed waves. First wave might hit from the front, the second from above or below, to maximize chaos and draw gunners in different directions. High-speed decoy fighters would make fake diving attack runs to distract gunners, while others made the real approach from less defended vectors. This tactic was especially effective against overworked or panicking gunners. German pilots quickly discovered that early B-17s lacked defensive guns in the nose. This glaring vulnerability became a favorite target vector, especially among experienced fighter aces. The glass nose and cockpit area offered little protection. A burst of 20mm cannon shells could shred through, killing both pilots and disabling the aircraft in seconds. Statistically, head-on attacks caused more bomber losses per attempt than attacks from the rear or side. A well-placed cannon burst could disable the pilot, navigator, or detonate the bomb load. However, the B-17G model added a powered chin turret with twin .5s, drastically improving frontal defense. Head-on attacks declined sharply after its widespread deployment in late 1943. Standard 7.92mm rounds from early Bf-109s could pepper a B-17 but rarely brought it down. It wasn't until the widespread adoption of 20mm and 30mm cannons that one-pass kills became more realistic. A single 20mm high-explosive shell could blow apart fuel lines, control cables, or even destroy a wing route. B-17s had armor, but not enough to withstand direct hits from multiple 20mm shells. The Mark 108 cannon fired slow but powerful 30mm shells. Just 3 to 4 hits from these cannons anywhere near the cockpit, engines, or fuselage often resulted in catastrophic failure or immediate kills. Surviving B-17 crews reported that cannon impacts felt like explosions inside the aircraft, shaking the whole airframe and sending metal shards through the interior. B-17 stragglers were inevitable due to damage. Even minor flak damage could reduce engine power or damage control surfaces, forcing more than a few B-17s to fall behind the formation within minutes of the first engagement. Many Luftwaffe fighters intentionally avoided attacking intact box formations due to overlapping defensive fire. Instead, they waited for stragglers, which had minimal protection and were easy preys. Escorts couldn't protect everyone, and long-range escorts, like P-41s, prioritized staying with the main group, leaving isolated B-17s with no fighter cover, sometimes for hundreds of miles. The B-17 was a marvel of engineering, a symbol of American resolve, and the centerpiece of daylight strategic bombing. Yet for all its guns and armor, it flew into a battlefield where the enemy had studied every weakness, rehearsed every angle of attack, and lurked behind walls of flak and fire. Thousands of airmen never came home, not because they lacked courage, but because the odds stacked against them were colder and more calculated than any machine gun could overcome. Thank you for watching, and please support my work by subscribing and purchasing my ebooks. You can find the links in my bio description or by searching for Adrian Langsford on Amazon.